Firstly, thank you, CFO, for arranging this. Judges, thank you very much for the tough questions that you're going to ask us just now. And thank you to everyone else. And thanks to the competitors for keeping us on our toes.
Yeah.
Over to you. Over to that.
Yeah, maybe on to that. So just to speak about what we address as ThisIsMe, I think the main thing that we've all had to deal with is repetitive submission of documents. Oh, you've got to get this document, you've got to march down to the bank, or you've got to march down to a branch, and you've got to bring an updated proof of address. And that world is just has not caught up to the modern world. That's the main consumer pain that we solve. And also, a lot of that data is terribly exposed. So for example, if you do take a proof of address to get a new phone contract, for example, how sure are you as an individual that that information isn't going to be traded or sold? So businesses.
Major thing with the banks as well as the friction. You have to pay someone to sit there and do a face-to-face interaction. It's also oftentimes inaccurate. So you need to up the game there, and you need to reduce that friction to ensure that you can stay in the game. Market info and opportunity. The size of the market slide is always one that gets us into trouble. We've said $70 million, and the way that we've done that is to extrapolate from 38 million people who are banked within South Africa specifically, and the amount of times that you need to do a FICA transaction with them. We've taken a 10% of that times the few times that they're going to get FICA to work out a market size. Competition, like I alluded to earlier, yes, they are there. We happen to be the first to launch this type of a remote onboarding solution in Africa as far as we know. We can do it incredibly quickly, and we started as an identity company. That's what we started as. As far as the legal is concerned, POPI, protection of personal information, like John was talking about earlier, it's horrendous how our data is all over the place. And so we've built this from that point of view. FICA, if it wasn't for FICA, we wouldn't be sitting here or standing here. So thank goodness that came through earlier today, or earlier this year.
All right, so here you'll see bits of what we actually do. So you'll see there on the left, there's different gestures being detected. That's incredibly difficult to do. Just after that, there were certain documents that were being scanned and the information lifted out. But just to talk more about the gestures, what happens through that process is that we prompt through 6 to 8 different gestures, in this case it's 4, prompt the user to perform certain gestures. So close your left eye, close your right eye. We've also got nod, wink, a number of different things. We detect when the user performs that action, and we snap a photo of that. Afterwards, we can use those photos to compare whether they actually match up. What does that prevent? It prevents someone from holding up a photo or even submitting information that's incorrect. The very next step that was after that was scanning of a document. In there is a lot of different technology that focuses or gets exactly the right focus on a document and grabs and lifts off information out of that document. A lot of you would know this one, which is a very fraudable document, and we've got different technology that can scan through that and make sure that the document hasn't necessarily been tampered with, adding to the risk score that you can attribute. Yeah.
There's also a report that comes through afterwards, making sure that everything is date and time stamped and it's trackable. All right.
I think you might need to go quick.
So what are our differentiators? As we spoke about earlier, you need to involve the user. You have to have the user involved at some point. So we've built our system to ensure that the user can be involved. At a later stage, as an individual, you can all download the ThisIsMe app. You can upload your personally identifiable information. Try saying that quickly. And what will happen is, if we're linked to that merchant, they can then go and fetch that data at a later stage with your permission. And that can link in once they've used this app or at a later stage as well. The other things that differentiate us is the machine learning tamper detection. That's what makes it a lot more accurate than a face-to-face interaction. Mobile SDK can be baked into a client's applications. Real-time. Also, if we are lacking in some identifiable information, we can use social media to ensure that there is some form of a credit score at a later stage. Our business model. This is the $1 million question. No, we don't charge R1 million per transaction. The model is a licensing fee for the SDK. So when you're using the remote onboarding solution, you can license the SDK. Then, depending on the amount of checks that you do, that is a per check volume-based transaction. Once we've got users on board that you're linked to, there's a consumer trace that you can fetch their information at a later stage for a far cheaper amount, and then the ongoing is also volume-based. For individual users, it's free.
Yeah, so some of our traction, we have some really amazing clients that have kind of totaled up to over 75 at the moment. We've got 2 patents in the area of identity verification and validation. We've had, that number at the bottom is actually a little bit more now, over $3 million in private individual angel funding. And yeah, we've performed over 1 million verifications of various data sets, which is really cool. Real big milestone for us.
And what we didn't get time to add in there is that the Gartner Aspiring Innovator, we're one of the Gartner Aspiring Innovators this year at the recent symposium, which was a great feather in our cap. Our executive team, over 60 years of management. Often you look at the management team and you wonder, do they have experience within the space? Well, we've got technology, we've got payments, a lot of digital experience, and some banking experience there too, which has added great value to the process.
Yeah, so our future, our growth. I think like many fintechs, we survive on and we rely on the quality of our development team. So that's something that we're focusing hard on, is recruiting the right people. And we've been dinged out, so.
Got 20 seconds.
20 seconds.
I said 20 seconds?
Yeah.
20-second
Right.
bell.
So we want to go global, and we want to expand our product offering quite dramatically, including a number of web solutions for the unbanked or underbanked, to make that onboarding facilitation so much better. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Juan.
Sure.
Thank you, Brennan.
My question is about the last point you mentioned. So how are you making this easier for the unbanked?
Yeah, so for the unbanked or underbanked, I suppose, we try to leverage off of social networks. It's the most accessible thing, and you know you might not have a bank account, but you can have a Facebook account, which is quite phenomenal. But what's interesting about that space is that data is being controlled a lot better now. In the past, it was leaked out and it was a lot more porous. You know, you could, as an organization, you could get access to it. But what differentiates us from everyone else is that we involve the individual wherever possible, of course. There's certain things that institutions need to do from a KYC perspective that doesn't necessarily involve the individual. But certainly from once you bring a user into the process, they can attribute information which you can use to triangulate and validate their information.
A turnaround time, so if using your SDK, if I issued a call, what would you be able to turn around in, I guess, and then just a transactional fee, because it's also about accessibility. As most times you need a trade account, this kind of stuff's not available to sort of on demand. So
Okay.
just accessibility financially, and then also turnaround times on the call.
Do you mean in terms of integration or actual?
If I'm sitting doing an online check,
Oh, okay.
what's your turnaround time on I click call, and then
Yeah.
I come back authenticated?
Yeah, geez, I don't think we've actually benchmarked that exactly, but the whole process was down to under 11 seconds. But that included the scanning of an ID as well. So beyond that, so what you didn't see in that process is that a lot of that information then goes through to our APIs, depending on what the institution needs for further analysis. But everything on device can happen within 11 seconds. So it's pretty quick.
It feels to me about 5 years or so from now, maybe a couple of years longer, identity is going to be like done and dusted, right? We're going to be filmed, we're going to be biometric, you're going to know, as I walk across Sandton, I'm going to be filmed 1,000 times. Everybody's going to know my movement, right?
Yeah.
So thinking about that, sort of looking at 5 years, your business model, is it around KYC, or is it more back to because you had the consumer and the business? Is it more about the consumer and their data and the protection of that data and the integrity of that data?
I think that we'll probably both answer to that. You know, we postulate that it's going to look like that in 5 years' time. We're going to walk around and have no control over who's filming us. That's because we're thinking in an opt-in model. What about an opt-out model? So if you're being constantly filmed and constantly, you can naturally opt out. That's your given right. And so what we're looking at is, how do we consistently look at what we need as individuals within the world that's moving so fast and always tracking us? So the opt-out is one of those things that we're thinking of. And if you've opted into something that has the ability to extend that into those spaces, like we're just discussing, then that should solve part of it at least.
Yeah. I see it as a bit of an extension as well. I think that big companies, and if you take, for example, the CCTV company that's recording everything, if you maybe extend it a little bit further to institutions like banking and financial service provision, the trend is definitely going towards those institutions actually submitting information to not only to other institutions but to the individual. So as an individual, I know I have easy access to my records now within a bank. But that's going to become a commodity in the future. So the bank is going to be able to make money from releasing that information back to me. And as the consumer, I'm going to appreciate that, because I can then use that in whatever was harvested out of that data somewhere else. So I think the whole ecosystem is going to blend, but I do think that the control is actually going back to the consumer for unmined things, probably.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And hopefully to your benefit as a consumer. Insurance premiums coming down because you've got more sensor data on you, whatever it might be. And having better control over what pieces of your identity information you're sharing. There's some things that some of us wouldn't want to share, but sometimes it is useful to share it because you get discounts or because you get a new offer or whatever it might be.
You've mentioned in your presentation there's one of your innovations is a first for Africa. Do you maybe just want to touch on that? Some details around that. What was it?
The first?
You mentioned there was a first for Africa, one of the propositions that you launched, one of the innovations.
So it's the actual remote onboarding facility that we showed now with the liveness detection and document scanning, and certainly from a green ID book perspective that I showed you as well. That's also definitely a first for us.
Nobody's doing that. Okay.
Yeah. But I think there's a lot more to come in the space, and I think. Someone mentioned it earlier about biometrics and the fact that it's always been this big draw card, but it's difficult to get right. And one of the challenges that we face as kind of more a consumer-leaning entity is that how do you prevent someone from locking out someone else's biometric? So let's say I create a profile and I register someone else's vocal biometric. How do you know that that other person has a claim to that biometric? So I think there's a lot more innovation still to come in that space, and it's exciting, super exciting. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Ron. Thank you very much, Brennan.
Thanks.
Thank you.